16-year-old girl living in the same house with her parents and younger sister found dead in her bedroom. 31 years later, the startling truth is uncovered. Yvonne Cox was born on March 24, 1973, in Kansas City, Missouri. Soon after, parents welcomed two more daughters. The family resided in a small two-story house located in a modest residential neighborhood. From an early age, Yvonne helped her parents take care of her younger siblings, regularly attended church, and had a passion for swimming. When Yvonne turned 16, she took on a part-time job at a local amusement park. Her family lived in poverty, and she aimed to earn some money during her free time from school. The majority of her summer vacation in 1989 was spent working. Her main responsibilities were taking orders and selling tickets for the attractions. On Wednesday, July 26, at around 10 p.m., after finishing her shift, Yvonne's mother and younger sister picked her up in their car. They opted for a ride home since taking public transportation from the park would have been time-consuming. Almost immediately after returning home, Yvonne went to sleep as she had to go to work again the next morning. She slept on the second floor in her own room, while her sisters usually slept in the adjacent rooms. However, on that night, she was alone. Her younger sister, Amber, who was only a year younger, worked as a babysitter for a family acquaintance that night. The other sister was out, and Yvonne decided to sleep on the first floor since it was much cooler there. It was a sweltering night, and the working air conditioner was only on the lower level. Their parents also slept on the first floor. The next morning, around 9 o'clock, the entire family woke up to the sound of the alarm clock in Yvonne's room. However, for some reason, she hadn't turned it off. Her younger sister and mother went upstairs to her room, where they encountered a horrifying sight. Yvonne lay lifeless on the bed, showing signs of bruising on her neck. There was no pulse, and her parents immediately called an ambulance. It was evident that Yvonne had died several hours earlier. After examining her body, forensic experts determined that she had been strangled and also subjected to sexual violence. From the early hours, the police realized that they faced a challenging investigation. Despite Yvonne being murdered in her own bedroom, a small house with very poor sound insulation, her parents and sister had heard nothing. However, an explanation was found for this. The air conditioner on the first floor was old and operated very loudly, drowning out any other sounds in the house. The only strange behavior noticed that night was from their poodle, who seemed restless and barked. However, this was attributed to the dog being pregnant. Upon investigating the crime scene, the police made several important discoveries. According to their theory, the attackers, either individuals or a group of criminals, gained entry to the house through a second-story window leading to the backyard. Parked near the house was an old trailer, which provided easy access to the window ledge. The window itself had been left open since there was no air conditioning on the second floor, and they had to find ways to cope with the heat. In Yvonne's room, experts found crucial pieces of evidence. There were a few short hairs, small bloodstains, and traces of semen on the bedsheet. All of these were sent to the laboratory for analysis. Additionally, several items went missing from the house, including radios, a Nintendo game console, and a stereo cassette player. Some items were found on the ground in front of the house, as if the thief had thrown them out of the window but left them behind for some reason. Detectives also discovered that various items had been arranged inside the closet of the adjacent room on the second floor. They speculated that the perpetrator had hidden in the closet, waiting for all the residents of the house to fall asleep. Usually Yvonne's sisters slept in that room, but not on that particular night. Therefore, nobody noticed the arranged items. Another peculiar piece of evidence was an old army cap found in Yvonne's room. Her family claimed they had never seen her with that item before, leading the detectives to believe that the killer might have left it behind at the crime scene. Despite the significant set of clues, the police were unable to quickly identify the suspects. The problem was that in 1989, DNA analysis was not well developed, and there were no shared genetic databases. Detective Benjamin Caldwell, who was assigned to the case, proposed the main theory of what had happened. According to him, there could have been multiple attackers, and they must have been familiar with the house. Not only did they know how to access the second floor through the backyard in complete darkness, but they also had knowledge of the room layout. The next step for the police was to search for witnesses. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and relatives of Fawn, but it yielded no results. The detectives faced a significant challenge. The neighborhood where the house was located was impoverished and crime-ridden. Various criminal groups operated in the area, making it difficult to hold individuals accountable. A month after Fawn's murder, the case finally made some progress. The police obtained a witness who pointed them towards 3 suspects. This witness possessed crucial details that had never been disclosed by the police, lending credibility to their account. The suspects turned out to be 3 teenagers, one of whom was in the same class as Fawn. They were arrested and interrogated, but all of them denied involvement in the murder. During a search of one suspect's home, the police discovered stolen items from the victim's room. This provided enough evidence to charge all 3 suspects with murder. However, the detectives faced disappointment once again. Firstly, the witness suddenly recanted their statement and stopped cooperating with the police. Secondly, the DNA analysis of the hair, blood, and semen found at the crime scene did not definitively match the suspect's samples. During those years, experts could not establish precise matches, and all tests produced inconclusive results. In other words, the analysis could neither confirm a complete match nor guarantee a clear mismatch. Despite these challenges, the police managed to extract useful information from one of the detained individuals during an interrogation. In one of the interviews, he confessed that they had indeed entered Fawn's house that night in the company of other boys and stolen several items. He described how he climbed to the 2nd floor using the awning and even revealed unknown details. According to him, when he threw the cassette player out of the window, the handle fell off. The guy hid it under a nearby bush, and the police actually found the item in that exact spot. However, the young man quickly recanted his words and refused to cooperate further with the investigation, rendering his confession inadmissible in court. Due to all this, the police had to release these individuals, and the investigation reached another dead end. Most likely the witnesses were simply intimidated, but without their testimonies, the case had virtually no chance. It is only known that one of them spent 8 months in prison for stealing items from Fawn's house. Since then, the case had been put on hold, and the police resumed the investigation only in the early 2000s. Their first step was to upload the DNA samples from the crime scene to the CODIS database, which had been created several years prior and contained DNA samples of people convicted of serious crimes. Unfortunately, no matches with Fawn's killer were found. The creation of this database was a result of significant scientific progress in DNA analysis. It also allowed the police to collect DNA samples from the 3 initial suspects once again and conduct more advanced tests. This time, the experts definitively determined that the hair, blood, and DNA did not belong to any of them. It was highly unusual considering the fact that the suspects were found with stolen items. Detectives speculated that the 3 boys indeed committed the robbery and entered the house that night, but there was another person with them. It was this person who subjected the girl to violence and killed her. All of this raised even more questions. Could it be possible that 4 criminals quietly infiltrated the house, killed Fawn, and left the crime scene unnoticed? The police still had no answer to this question, and the case remained stagnant over the years. The Volna family gradually lost faith that this murder would ever be solved. They continued to believe that the 3 initial suspects were in their house that night and could identify the killer, but they would never do so. The only thing that could help them uncover the truth was a DNA sample stored in the police laboratory since 2018. Something interesting happened when Amber, Fawn's younger sister, shared a few disturbing details about the crime on a popular American forum dedicated to unsolved crimes. The forum had gained a very reliable reputation over its 23 years of existence, and its members had helped the police solve several high-profile cases. Amber went through verification and confirmed her identity, so her post deserved attention. According to her, the criminals entered the house when Fawn's mother and younger sister went to pick her up from work. Their father, who was at home at the time, was asleep. The perpetrators hid in a closet in an empty room on the 2nd floor and waited for everyone to fall asleep. Amber also revealed that at least 2 of the criminals were personally acquainted with her. She mentioned that one of them went to school with her, while the second one had recently met her at church, just a few days before the murder. Amber was present when they first interacted and was convinced that the guy showed interest in her sister romantically. Based on this, she concluded that the criminals had initially planned to kill Fawn, and the robbery was merely an accompanying factor. However, the police adhered to the theory that the criminals broke into the house with the intention of theft and stumbled upon a sleeping girl, deciding to subject her to violence. Why was Amber so certain that they had premeditated murder? She explained that robbing their house would have been pointless. The Volna family lived in poverty, and they had nothing valuable. However, a more intriguing fact emerged from Amber's account. She revealed that the criminals used her younger sister's nightgown to strangle Fawn. The nightgown was in the adjacent room, indicating that the attackers had taken it with them from there and hid in the closet, planning to use it to suffocate the victim. If they hadn't premeditated the murder and had stumbled upon Fawn during the robbery, it wouldn't have made any sense for them to take the nightgown from the neighboring room. Amber added that the criminals must have also known the family's schedule to enter the house unnoticed. She herself worked as a nanny from Monday to Friday and was only home during the daytime. On weekends, she stayed in the same room on the second floor through which the burglars gained entry. Consequently, the criminals would have been immediately noticed. Furthermore, they had to monitor the house and wait for the moment when Fawn's mother and her younger sister would go to pick her up from work. Despite all this, Amber's account did not bring the case any closer to being solved. However, it was already 2018, and the field of DNA analysis had advanced significantly. Numerous long-forgotten cases were being solved thanks to new analysis tools. Fawn's relatives witnessed all of this and expressed their frustration at the police's reluctance to reopen the murder investigation. They had been constantly communicating with the detectives handling the case, but the only response they received was that expanded DNA testing required funding. With dozens of similar cases and limited police resources, the relatives had to wait for their turn and for funding to be allocated. However, they took matters into their own hands and launched a fundraising campaign in 2019. The family aimed to cover the expenses for DNA sample analysis entirely and offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrator. Thanks to active media coverage and numerous interviews given by the relatives, many compassionate individuals responded to their plea for help. The family quickly raised the necessary funds, but they were in for disappointment once again. The police department refused to initiate the investigation at the expense of the victims' relatives. The lead detective explained that such an approach would create a significant problem. If the relatives of one victim were able to afford these tests and expedite the results, then hundreds of other families who had been seeking justice for years would also demand the same right. However, implementing this practice was simply impossible, as only a few laboratories worldwide conducted innovative DNA research. One such leading company in the field was Paragon Labs, which we have previously mentioned in our other videos. Despite their groundbreaking work, there were limitations to the progress made in DNA analysis, ranging from identifying genetic relatives to creating an approximate profile of the DNA's owner. It was this laboratory that was supposed to handle the examination of the samples collected from Fawn's bedroom on the night of the murder. The victims' relatives believed that the police were not expediting their case due to another reason. They believed that being a poor family from a disadvantaged area, their murders were not prioritized by investigators. In an interview, Fawn's sister mentioned that if the victims were wealthy or influential individuals, all necessary investigations would have been conducted immediately. Unfortunately, they were unable to expedite the process, and it was only by the end of 2020 that the long-awaited breakthrough finally occurred. With financial support from the FBI, the police eventually sent the samples from Fawn's room to the laboratory for detailed DNA analysis and the search for possible relatives of the DNA owner. The main focus of their work was the semen sample found at the crime scene. In November 2020, it finally became possible to identify the person to whom this DNA belonged. It turned out to be Fawn Donald Fox's half-brother. Of course, such news shocked the entire family. At the time of Fawn's death, Donald was 21 years old, and no one even considered his possible involvement. However, Donald was quite a troubled person and constantly ended up behind bars. He was convicted of petty crimes, such as theft and possession of prohibited substances. Unfortunately, during those years, DNA samples were not taken from such criminals, or else the case would have been solved much earlier. In 2006, Donald died from an overdose. However, the police investigated his death because some circumstances seemed suspicious to them. It was thanks to this investigation that a sample of his DNA was preserved, but it was not entered into the FBI database because the man was a victim in that case. As soon as the experts informed the police about their discovery, they compared the sample with the semen found at the crime scene and obtained a 100% match. Despite the gravity of this discovery, Fawn's relatives finally received an answer to the question that had haunted them for 31 years. However, in this whole story, one very important detail remained. Numerous clues indicated that the three initial suspects were also present in Fawn's house that night. Now it was clear where the criminals knew the house and the family's routines so precisely. Donald was not an uncommon guest for them and knew all these nuances. However, the police closed the case and no new charges were brought against these three men. Fawn's sister stated that there was no point in pressuring them for a confession, even though these individuals were present in the house that night. It's possible that they may not have even witnessed the murder itself. Donald could have remained in the house one and only then attacked Fawn. I added that these three suspects have already paid for their actions throughout this time when the case remained unsolved. The entire neighborhood was 100% convinced of their guilt, which led to extremely negative attitudes towards them and all the resulting consequences. According to Fawn's sister, their lives were practically shattered. Furthermore, after the closure of the case, it was revealed that the police initially learned about these suspects from the family of one of them. The relatives noticed a Nintendo console among his belongings and remembered that such a console was stolen from Fawn's house. This information was reported in the news, and every resident in the neighborhood already knew all the details. In any case, proving their guilt was simply impossible, and the victims' relatives finally know the name of the killer. He lived for 17 years without facing any punishment for his deeds, and all this time he interacted with the family as if nothing had happened. However, in the end, his addiction to illicit substances led him to the grave, and he no longer posed a threat to anyone. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like the video.